Thanks, Rob. It's really awesome to be here and to be talking about my research, and particularly to all of you who are very passionate about the issues that I'm also passionate about. Today I'm going to be talking about how we rebuild community-based supports for people with serious mental illness in Australia. As Rob said, it's been a long-term project and interest of mine, both in Australia and previously at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, looking at the way that mental health systems and services are designed so that they have better outcomes for people who need them most. I just wanted to, well, I'm actually not going to do that first. I'm just going to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Turrbal and Jagera people, and we had such a wonderful welcome to country yesterday by Maruchi Baramba, and just wanted to acknowledge that as well. So I'm going to start with this statement, and I think it's probably one that you probably agree with, that Australian health and social policy is failing people with serious mental illness. And it's been doing that for a long time. It's been probably failing more than succeeding in terms of the reach of policy, and currently and you know, over the last 10 years, I think has not been heading in the right direction. So that's the sort of statement that I start with, which is a sort of, you know, starting on a downer, but actually what I'm going to talk about today in my presentation is what I think is a model that we can really push for and into improving the situation. And I think that there are some, I suppose I'm a policy academic, but some policy sort of, there's policy opportunities that are here. So we can make change at the moment in a way that we haven't been able to for a number of years. Okay, so just as a starting point, and this going back to what Lisa was talking about yesterday in the UN Convention of the Rights of People with Disability. So Australia is a signatory of this convention, and under that convention, people with disability, you know, there should be equal participation and inclusion for people with disability, including disability that arises from mental illness. And Australia's signed it, but actually what we find is that in the way that our policy operates, some people with disability are more equal than others. So, and often people with severe mental illness are not receiving the same benefits that other people who have disability receive. I talk about disability because I think it's a way of thinking about the disabling impacts of some forms of severe mental illness. So we know that not everyone who's diagnosed with a severe mental illness experiences disability or even experiences disability at all times in their lives, but a lot of people do experience disability that arises from severe mental illness. And if we conceptualize it in relation to the UN Convention, then we're able to think about the rights of people with severe mental illness that are not being fulfilled, or are not being fulfilled equally in relation to other people. So we talk about, when we talk about the NDIS, we often talk about psychosocial disability. That's a really difficult term. And one of the real difficulties is it doesn't mean anything. Like, it's sort of like a term that is just a term, and you can apply all sorts of things to it. And so it's a difficult concept to work with, but I think it links together severe mental illness and the disabling impacts of that severe mental illness and the need to act on it in that context. So I'll just tell you just very briefly about our research program. I was very lucky to receive a very large grant from the Australian Research Council, sort of to support work that I've been doing, I suppose, as a hobby for a really long time without any sort of funding. And a lot of people in this room were part of the, I suppose, the thinking that went into the development of that grant. And I think actually a couple of years ago, oh, it was more than that. I think there was an event here, the Australian Psychosocial Alliance, just up the road. and I talked to Tony. I think Tony convinced me to come to that, even though I was quite busy. And actually, that event really helped me to put together a grant. And talking to Jerry from the National Disability Insurance Agency actually helped to get, that event really helped to get this grant, I think, and put my thinking together. So what it enabled me to do, so I'm a qualitative researcher, I don't know much about numbers, but we're desperately in need of really understanding what is happening for people with severe mental illness who are in the National Disability Insurance Scheme and those that are not in the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So my interest in the NDIS came about because I'd seen previous programs and evaluated previous programs in Australia and overseas, but primarily in Australia. And when the NDIS was coming in, I could see that it wasn't going to meet the needs of people like previous programs had. And when I looked at them side by side, you know, the criteria for getting into the scheme and what was being offered, I could see that people were going to lose out as a result of the transition to the NDIS, and yet the funding from existing programs such as Partners in Recovery was going into those, into the NDIS. So our program involves, we've got a number of postdoctoral researchers and research assistants, some of whom are here today. And we look at administrative data, we look at survey data, we're doing a lot of qualitative interviews. Our team includes people with their own experience of severe mental illness and community-based Aboriginal researchers working in rural New South Wales, and PhD students who are also receiving NDIS support as well. So we really have a very broad team, and this is really enabled by this amazing grant that we got. So these are some of the things that is completed. I'm not going to read that through, but this is the type of research that we've been doing so far and that I draw upon in the presentation today. Okay, so who are we talking about? So in Australia, there's around 5.5 million people with disability. About 3.2 million are under the age of 65, based on the National Survey of Mental Health and Wellbeing. So that survey is it's not a whole of population survey, so it's a survey of that estimates prevalence. 8.5 million had experienced mental illness of some kind in their lifetime, which is around 43% of the population. 4.3 million had experienced a mental illness in the previous 12 months. Around 3% had a severe mental illness, of which 330,000 people have episodic mental illness and 170,000 have persistent mental illness. And then there's other government estimates that put the number at 686,000. This is, those are the sort of different figures that are used, but often there's differences. So that's why there's variation in the figures that are used. And as I said, it's psychosocial disability rather than severe mental illness. Now, I'm going to start by saying my project is about fixing the NDIS, but actually the NDIS is not the answer. And that doesn't mean we give up on the NDIS. The NDIS is fantastic for people who get it, but there's a lot of people who don't get it, and it's actually a really difficult scheme to make changes to, and that's because it's really legislatively defined. So it's actually difficult. It's rather than regulatorily designed. It's not a word, but it's really difficult to make changes to it because it's it's difficult to change legislation. And that means that while there are options for changing the NDIS, it's because of the way that scheme is structured and the difficulty with people getting into the scheme, then it's actually really difficult to change, and we need to think about what happens outside of the NDIS for people with serious mental illness. Now, I showed this in the town hall the other night, but this is a really important graph to look at. I'm sorry that the numbers are quite small, but Basically, the orange bars here are the number of people with psychosocial disability who are applying to the scheme and getting into the scheme. The green bars are every other type of disability who are applying to the scheme and getting into the scheme. This here is September 2022, that here is December 2024. And this shows that since the 8% cap was announced on the NDIS, that the number of people getting into the scheme with psychosocial disability who apply has reduced a lot. And in fact, there's another bar that I could put up there where it's even lower, 26%. So it's like it just keeps going down. And there's an analysis that sits beyond this that shows that actually it was more stable up until this point. But what that shows is that, well, it shows a number of things. It's difficult to interpret what's happening here because we can't go and we can't look at the planners and see the assessors and see what's in their minds as they're assessing people's eligibility. It could be saying that the NDIA is placing internal pressure on assessors not to include people with psychosocial disability. I actually don't think that's the case from talking to people within the agency. But what it could be is that they're tightening access for everyone. They're looking with more scrutiny, and it's easier to exclude people with psychosocial disability because it's easier to say the mental health system should deal with it. Or it's easier to say, oh, they haven't tried all of the options, or it's not a permanent disability. And all of those things, I think, are affecting this figure. Another thing, though, that is affecting this figure is that there's nothing outside of there's very limited supports outside of the NDIS. So it means it can push people onto the NDIS who are not quite right for the scheme because they're desperate for support, or the people that support them are desperate for the support for the individual. So it's pushing them to apply for something that is not quite right for them. So that's another thing that I think is going into these figures, though we're not quite sure. So for people who are getting onto the scheme, it's not working. So the data on effectiveness shows that it's not as effective in increasing inclusion in society, or it's not, its aim is to have people with disability more included in society, and some of those outcomes that you would expect are not passed on to people with psychosocial disability in the same way that it's passed on to other people with disability. And actually we don't actually have much data to draw on in effectiveness, and I think that's one of the problems with the NDIS. It doesn't sell itself very well because it can't show effectiveness because it's not collecting data on effectiveness. It's one of the problems with it. So this is limited data. So despite growing costs, and there's around 61,000 people with psychosocial disability on the scheme, we're not seeing the outcomes that we would expect across the board for people with psychosocial disability. That doesn't mean it's not working. It's working for those people in ways. It's really it's great for a lot of people who are on it, but we're not sort of seeing the things that we might expect from that scheme. And the NDIS comes too late for people. What we actually find with, if you look at the number of, most people with serious mental illness are diagnosed or experience their first episodes of serious mental illness in their late teens, early 20s, in late adolescence, or their 20s. So we have a number of programs that support people in that age group, such as Headspace, for example. But most people who join the NDIS, who get onto the NDIS, are over 45 in this age group. So they're over 35, but actually most 50% are aged over 45. In comparison with, I'm using intellectual disability as the comparator throughout, but basically all other disability groups, age at access is much lower. And even if you exclude autism and the developmental disabilities, the age at access is much lower. So what's that showing us? It's showing us that between the age that someone starts to experience severe mental illness and 45, something is happening. That they're coping for a while, they're included in society for a while, and then they're not. And then their illness is becoming more disabling as people are less included in society, as they're less supported. So it's almost like we're creating disability because of a lack of supports during that period. So we lack, you know, there's a lot of supports that are missing between when Headspace and those types of supports finish and when people are entering the NDIS. So I suppose what would prevent, we're talking about what would prevent psychosocial disability. This is not preventing mental illness, it's preventing the disabling impacts, causing people to be excluded from society or not fulfilling, not living their lives because of their not being supported to live their lives. So this is what we're focusing. So at the moment, yes, so statement, what is outside the NDIS is not meeting people's needs currently. The existing funding is also missing the people most in need. So support is, we've known for a really long time, support is fragmented and chaotic. When Partners in Recovery was launched in 2000 the funding was, I think, announced in 2011, we made exactly the same statements about the fragmented systems and the need to support them. So, and then existing national programs don't really target this group. What we found in our research is that better access is not really accessible for people with severe mental illness because it costs money to pay the gap fee, or there's just no better access psychologists that they can actually access in their regions. So a lot of the things that are, a lot of the big mental health policies don't actually effectively target this group. As we know, previous programs such as FAMS or Partners in Recovery were defunded to fund the NDIS, and then they didn't make it into the NDIS during the transition. So a really significant number didn't get into the NDIS, often because of the permanence criteria, which is the most strict of any of our legislation in Australia because it's a lifelong permanence. As an example, the DSP, the Disability Support Pension, is only 2 years, is how they characterise permanence. The NDIS was never meant to actually cover everyone, but we've acted like it was everything for disability. So we haven't supported what's outside of it. And funding has not increased in real terms since 1992, when I was at school, before the Burdekin report came out. We really haven't actually, in real terms, increased mental health funding for this group. So the situation has stalled, and it's stalled for a really long time. So what we're talking about today is the option that sits outside of it, which is foundational supports. So some of you might have heard about foundational supports. Some of you, most of you probably don't quite know what it looks like. In fact, we didn't know what it quite looks like. And so today I'm going to talk about what a framework for foundational supports that we've developed to try and get people talking about it. So it's not necessarily the solution, but it's just trying to get the discussion going. So general foundational supports isn't what we're talking about, but there's general foundational supports and targeted foundational supports. The government's work at the moment is mainly about general foundational supports. And their aim is to provide support outside of the NDIS to improve inclusion, social and economic participation. These came out of the NDIS review, and there's a targeted foundational supports is what we're interested in. So targeted psychosocial foundational supports are meant to provide community-based support for people who need it, that is matched to people's level of need. There's really not very much written about it, so this is about all that you can say about foundational supports. There was always meant to be a tier of support that sat outside of the NDIS for people, or that tier of people who are able to get into the full scheme. It was never funded, and currently foundational supports for children and young people are being discussed as well. Psychosocial supports are lagging, foundational supports is lagging, but the Minister has committed to prioritising it. So I think that's our best bet for action, but what should it look like? And this is what I'm trying to do. So we need something to argue about. Okay, so I don't have the solution, but what I have is a solution that I want to argue for or against. This is the foundational model that we've developed, and don't worry, I'm going to talk through all of these bits. So the aim is to think about the foundation that people need. So what is a foundation? What foundation do people need in order to build or be included in society and be supported to live their lives? So this is the model that I'm going to talk through, and this is what's been developed as a result of all the different aspects of our research and discussion so far, and we're discussing it with a lot of people at the moment to try and critique it, and that's what I want. I want critique and arguments. So at the heart of the model is a navigator. So under the mental health, under the NDIS review, the idea of a recovery navigator was talked about, and our research has shown that people really would appreciate a navigator. And the navigator would be not someone who just, well, the aim of an ideal navigator is someone who knows someone and who knows the system and can support people in understanding what is going to work for them. It's based on a relationship between someone with serious mental illness and someone who knows what's in the system that can support them and understands mental illness. Most people who provide support under the NDIS, or most people within the NDIA, have no training when it comes, or any sort of training, not even like a day's training or like any sort of training when it comes to supporting people with a mental illness. They're just thinking, based on all the stigmatized information we get in society, that's what they're drawing on in supporting people. This role has to be someone who understands severe mental illness, it understands people's journeys. It can be a peer role, it can be someone with, what people have said is that it's actually not really a qualification that's important, it's an understanding and an experience rather than a qualification. So it's a key, I suppose, a mediator between people and services. And it should be provided for everyone because it's what enables the services to be right and what supports, and it's the role that supports people as they try and think about maybe accessing the NDIS or other types of supports. I think the other thing that our research has shown is that it has to be embedded in a supportive team. We can't just have, under the NDIS at the moment, you can have a support coordinator that's based in a different state to you, that's supporting you but actually has no idea about the community you live with or the priorities of that community or the experience of living in your community or in your life. So it needs to be someone who is localised or understands the local community. And I think part of that is being embedded in an organisation that has strong recovery foundations to it and can draw on the collective knowledge of that organisation. Another part that is important is flexible funding. So flexible funding is funding that is not tied to a particular item of service. So under the NDIS, everything that you provide to someone has to be listed in their plan, and it has to be like a service that is an NDIS approved service. But we know that for people with severe mental illness, the things that come up are not like necessarily an item on like a list, that they are unique and important. They can be really important for someone's recovery, that they're fulfilled, but they're not necessarily things that, that you have to have planned and, 6-month plan review and, that are getting fulfilled. Some things are much more immediate. So flexible funding is important for foundational supports. It was really effective under Partners in Recovery, where amounts of money could be used by consortiums to sort of buy people out of trouble or to support them. So at an individual level, that's important. At a community level, it's also important because there's there's things that for local communities can really support the growth of mental health supports within that community, or like, for example, one of the types of supports might be like a community group who's supporting a particular cultural group to do cooking classes, but you also, do support for mental illness within that as well. So there's those types of things that are, localized and is important too. Then there's health, allied health and community support. So this would really depend on individual needs, and there should be the ability to buy in those supports, or not buy in those supports, but bring in those supports for individuals when they're needed. And they should be based on like referral pathways, or just being able to utilize supports that are existing in the community. So they would be things like OTs, psychologists, housing supports. Now this is, I suppose, underpinning all of this is a social determinants approach, where we're trying to address the equity, the things that mean that some people are able to utilize mental health supports better than others because they have access. If you've got access to housing, you're better able to access mental health supports or utilize the supports that you have access to. So trying to think about those social determinants that people need support with is important as well. But that shouldn't be, it should be expert organisations that are brought in rather than a navigator trying to do that for the individual. It's more linking them with services. And currently, I don't actually think that there's enough money that goes into employment supports or food programs or housing supports that will support these groups. So there might need to be additional funding for those existing services. I think other elements that people have talked about is important are things like assessments. So some people do need assessments in order to understand or utilise other services. Understand their needs or to utilise other services. So for example, to access the NDIS, you need assessments. So I think it's linking people to assessments. Then complex, I don't like the word case management, but this is the language that's being used. But I think people need, there's like a specialist complex needs service that is needed in support of this as well. So, for example, in New South Wales, there was an integrated service response which was utilised in order to support complex needs. Well, that type of service is really important for people whose lives are impacted by, really complex needs. Public mental health, so I think that's a really important element of it, and it's about community. So increasing the mental health knowledge of the community also helps support people with mental illness in that community. Family support is really important. So one of the things that we've used to model this on is where the Medicare mental health locals are working really well. And in those organisations, family support has been really successful as a model for supporting people. So one of the things that the NDIS does is it moves everything back to the individual. It separates the individual from the community, it separates the individual from the family, because it's an individualized budget. And that means that families have lost support and communities lose support around the individual. So I think where these Medicare mental health locals have been working well, they've been bringing in and working with families too. And then this is really important, NDIS application support. So for some people, they need the NDIS. So the NDIS is really important for people who have ongoing needs that could be classed as permanent needs. But that support needs to be professionalized, because some people are just applying again and again and again and again to the NDIS, getting words wrong in the application and just being excluded for seemingly no reason when they really, really need the NDIS. So I think a part of the foundational supports model should be this sort of a professionalized NDIS application in order to get people to receive that support. I think other essential elements, there is a no wrong door approach. So the NDIS is so many wrong doors. There's wrong language to use, there's wrong forms to fill out, there's not answering the phone on time, getting the wrong person to do your assessment. Other programs that have used a no wrong door approach, that doesn't mean that everyone just gets like all of the services that are available. It's about you welcome people and then you work out what their needs are and give them the supports that they need. But we shouldn't be shutting the door on people who are coming for mental health supports. And if you're not eligible for the NDIS, the door is shut and you're sent on your way to nothing at the moment. Like we need to support people however they come to foundational supports. I think the other thing is the funding mix that's reactive to local areas. It's really essential that this is a localized model of support that is responsive to local needs. And it's important because if you go to someone, if you're getting support from an organisation that really doesn't understand what's in the local community, then you're likely to get the wrong type of support as well. I think, this is just because we need to understand what's actually working. We do something in Australia where we introduce services and we have no idea whether they're working at all, and then we decide to fund them or not fund them based on no evidence at all, or just like a political will. What Partners in Recovery did, and I'm sorry to harp on about it, but it's a good program, is that there was mandatory evaluation in every site. It's probably the most well-evaluated psychosocial support program internationally because of that. We have 30-ish peer-reviewed articles on Partners in Recovery, and that means that we have a really good understanding of what works and what doesn't work, and we can compare it. And it needs to operate separately but collaboratively with the NDIS. So that's really important because it can't operate in a silo. So outside the foundation organisation, there needs to be, so the foundation organisation. So key functions should be like coordination or commissioning of services where needed, navigator supervision, and then like holding the budget basically for flexible funding or community funding. Now there's a number of options that we have for where this foundational supports sit. So primary health networks, they have some difficulties, but the benefit of them is that they're national. So there's a primary health network for everyone. Everyone's got one. And they've got usually good linkages with the mental health services and local health districts. Other options are advocacy organisations. Now the benefits of that is they have really good understanding of people's needs. The drawback is that they're not as well connected to clinical services, so they're not so great in maybe transition support, which is really important. Then like psychosocial support focused NGOs with experience of psychosocial service delivery, so they've got an understanding of psychosocial supports but also service delivery, so that's another option. Consortia, so consortia of NGOs and advocacy groups, local community groups or PHNs, any of the above. Consortia are useful because they bring together a range of different expertise and where they work well enable supports to be more cohesive. Then and I'm nearly finished, but outside the foundation organisation, so if you can see there, I think that the foundational supports need to sit beside other specialised long or short-term supports like transition support programs, or things like in New South Wales we have HASI and other programs. Digital supports, they would not be held by the foundational support, but actually you need a navigator to support you with digital supports and to put you send you in the right direction for digital supports, and then the NDIS as well. So I'm not going to talk to this slide, but I think we've come up with a model of the patient participant journey, and what we're trying to say is that this is not just, while it's maybe time, it operates over a discrete time period, people should be able to go back into it as well. It shouldn't just be you get it and then you don't. Okay, what are the stumbling blocks? We know that there's a lack of state, territory and federal government agreement at the moment. There's a lack of political will to push. I mean, I think this is the most frustrating thing about support, like this, trying to be a policy academic, trying to come up with options in this area, is that you can come up with options, you can even tell them to the NDIA and they can think that they're a good idea, but unless there's the political will to change, nothing happens. Like, it needs political will. We hope that Minister Butler is in the right place now as the NDIS minister and the health minister to push some of these things, but you know, he has to take it to cabinet and they have to agree with it as well. There has to be, like, we need to do more political work to try and push for action. And you know, this is a model to argue for or against. But what we need is like broad community thinking around, or consultation around foundational supports. What I'm worried about is that we're doing work on children and young people and general foundational supports at the moment, and that there might be a path dependency where psychosocial foundational supports are based on that instead of what we want as a community. If our foundational supports thinking comes after all of that, you know, they're going to be already thinking this is how we do foundational supports. We need to have the conversation now so that our foundational supports are influencing that rather than the other way around. Or we might end up with trying to squeeze into some sort of framework that is meaningless or useless. No new funding at the moment, even though Ivan Frkovic was talking about the other night new funding in Queensland. I can't see that there is new funding at the moment, and it's unacceptable to the sector to be moving huge amounts of funding from the NDIS to foundational supports, as the Grattan report suggested that we do. That's, I think, is very difficult to make that case at the moment. So they're the stumbling blocks and my invitation to argue and be irate and to ask questions.